For a long time, I believed my marriage was strong, not perfect, but solid. Audrey and I had been together for years, navigating the usual highs and lows. We always found a way to resolve our problems. Or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I realized that while I clung to belief of secure marriage, Audrey had already begun to detach emotionally. It wasn't an abrupt change, but a gradual shift. She stopped doing the small, thoughtful gestures she once did. Life can be stressful and moods fluctuate, so I initially dismissed it. But this felt different. This wasn't just stress. People don't wake up one morning and suddenly start treating their spouse as an afterthought. Transformations like these don't occur without a deeper cause, and I was determined to uncover what that was. She started coming home late more often, and when I asked where she had been, her answers were vague, almost indifferent. "Just out," she'd reply, barely glancing up from her phone. The few times I pressed for details, she would roll her eyes or sigh, as if I were irritating her. This was unlike her. Audrey had never disregarded me this way before. The woman I married once shared everything with me, sometimes down to the smallest detail. Now, I was lucky to get more than a single word response. Then there was her phone. It was always with her, whether she was sitting in the living room or just grabbing a glass of water. She never let it out of her sight. Late at night, I noticed the faint glow of the screen. "Who are you texting?" I asked. "Just a friend," she replied casually. But when I asked which friend, her tone turned sharp. "Why do you care?" One night, lying in bed, I couldn't ignore the change any longer. I turned to her. "Audrey, what's going on? Why have you been acting like this?" Without hesitation, she exhaled sharply. If I had something to say, I'd say it. "Let me sleep?" That response stung. It validated the fears I had been suppressing. A few days later, the truth came in the form of a phone call from a friend. His voice was serious. "Look, I don't want to be the one to say this, but I think you should pay closer attention to Audrey. I saw her with a man, and it didn't seem like they were just friends." I was speechless. My first instinct was denial. No, not Audrey. Not my wife. There had to be some mistake. But then I thought about her recent behavior. The emotional distance, the secrecy, the late nights, the locked phone, the shift in her attitude. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't sudden. I wanted to reject it. But deep down, I knew my friend was right. I had sensed something was off for a while. But suspecting it and proving it were two different things. I needed undeniable evidence. And that meant starting with her phone. Audrey had always been private about it. But lately, her secrecy had escalated. She kept it with her at all times, even when stepping outside for just a moment. When she used it, she tilted the screen away from me. That alone was suspicious. But I needed more than just intuition. One night, I finally got the opportunity one I'd been waiting for. She left her phone on the couch and stepped into the bathroom. My heart pounded as I reached for it. This was my chance. I swiped up to unlock the screen. It remained locked. My worst fear was confirmed. She had changed the password. I tried the old one anyway. It didn't work. My stomach sank. Audrey and I had never kept our passwords from each other. This wasn't an accident or coincidence. It was a deliberate choice. She was hiding something. If I couldn't access her phone, I needed another way. I had to see it with my own eyes. A few days later, the opportunity finally presented itself. Audrey casually mentioned that she was heading out to run an errand. No specifics. No mention of who she was going with. It was vague enough to set off alarms in my mind. I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left, grabbed my keys, and drove off, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't notice. I tailed her through several streets until she stopped in front of an unfamiliar house. She got out of the car and walked straight to the door, knocking with the ease of someone who had done it before. And then the door opened. There he was, a man. I hadn't realized he wasn't surprised to see her. In fact, he smiled and casually stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The door shut behind him, and just like that, my wife was inside another man's home. I didn't charge in. I didn't call her out. I didn't create a spectacle. Instead, I stood there, camera in hand, capturing every damning moment. After several minutes of staring at the house, at the undeniable truth of my crumbling marriage, I quietly started my car and drove away. She returned home that night as if nothing had changed. That was the part that hurt the most. I knew I had waited long enough. Summoning her into the living room, I gestured for her to sit. She exhaled sharply, clearly irritated but complied. Folding her arms across her chest, she fixed me with a look of impatience, as if she had more important things to do. I took a deep breath, locked eyes with her, and stated in a calm, unwavering voice, "End this or we're done." No yelling, no threats, just a simple ultimatum. She frowned, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "There's nothing going on." Without a word, I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. The evidence was irrefutable. Clear images of her stepping into his house, laughing with him. I watched her face closely. For a fraction of a second, she looked caught. But just as quickly, her expression shifted. The guilt evaporated, replaced with something else. Rage. "You followed me," she hissed. "That's insane. You don't trust me, so now you're stalking me? That's sick, Nick." A cold numbness spread through me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even ashamed. Worse, she wasn't surprised. Instead of taking responsibility, she twisted it, painting me as the villain for uncovering the truth. I exhaled slowly and nodded to myself. "Got it," I murmured, standing up. No arguments, no pleading. There was no point. She had already made her choice. The following week passed in silence. We still shared a house, but we were strangers now. No small talk, no forced smiles. Just two people coexisting in a space where love no longer lived, waiting for the inevitable. She didn't try to justify herself. I didn't expect her to. I already knew she wasn't going to stop seeing him. And I wasn't about to beg her for loyalty. That wasn't love. That was desperation. And I wasn't desperate. While she carried on her charade, pretending nothing had changed, I accepted that everything already had. I paid a quiet visit to my lawyer and set the wheels in motion. If Audrey was so eager to be with him, she was welcome to him. But she wouldn't drag me down in the process. Maybe she felt guilty and was looking to smooth things over. Or maybe this was part of some larger ploy, a confession, an excuse, or one last attempt to control the narrative before blindsiding me. Whatever it was, I had no intention of sitting idly by, waiting to see how her story unfolded. Because what she didn't know was that I had already written my own ending. The divorce papers were ready, neatly stacked in a folder, waiting for the right moment. But that wasn't my only surprise. While she had been sneaking around with her lover, I had found someone too, her best friend. It started as harmless conversations. Share frustrations about Audrey's behavior. But over time, it became something more. She saw Audrey for who she really was. She understood exactly what I had endured. So, if tonight's dinner was yet another one of Audrey's mind games, if she was still carrying on her affair, I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't even be angry. I would simply end things, on my terms. That evening, the air felt different. A rich aroma of home-cooked food drifted from the kitchen, something I hadn't experienced in ages. Months ago, I might have mistaken this for an attempt to fix things. But I wasn't naive anymore. Whatever this dinner was, it wasn't a peace offering. I sat at the table, watching as she moved effortlessly, setting the plates, pouring the wine, smiling as if nothing had happened. We ate mostly in silence. She didn't ask about my day, and I didn't ask about hers. The only sounds were the quiet clinks of silverware, the occasional sip of wine, and the suffocating tension lingering between us like an unwanted guest. Halfway through the meal, I placed my fork down and met her gaze. She was too calm, too composed. A woman who had already made up her mind. Leaning back slightly, I asked, "So, have you ended your affair?" Not a single flinch. Instead, she smirked, reclining in her chair as if she had been anticipating this very moment. Then she spoke. "I'm leaving you." I let out a slow breath, not in anger, but amusement. Once upon a time, those words would have destroyed me. I would have begged, pleaded, tried to fix things. But now, it felt like the final page of a book I should have closed long ago. A genuine smile crossed my face. Without a word, I got up, walked into the bedroom, and returned with a neatly stacked set of documents. I placed them on the table and slid them toward her. "Perfect," I said, my tone steady. I already signed the papers. For the first time that evening, her confidence wavered. She hadn't seen this coming. Her eyes darted between the documents and me, searching for any emotion she could exploit. But there was nothing, just calm detachment. Then, ding-dong, her head snapped toward the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. I, on the other hand, had been waiting for this all night. Pushing my chair back, I strolled to the door, taking my time. I pulled it open, and there she was, standing in the doorway. Effortlessly stunning was Audrey's best friend, the woman she had confided in, the woman who had been growing closer to me ever since I accepted that my marriage was over. Stepping aside, I gestured toward her. "Meet my new girlfriend." Audrey's expression was priceless. Not just shock, betrayal, disbelief, maybe even regret. She had played her game, certain she had already won, but she had forgotten one simple truth. When you play games, you better be prepared to lose.